The text message wasn't meant for me. At 11:30 on a Tuesday night, hunched over blueprints in my architectural studio, the last thing I expected was my phone buzzing with someone else's excitement. "Room 410 is ready. Can't wait to see you tonight, Zara." I stared at the screen, my wife's name glowing back at me like a neon sign advertising everything wrong with my marriage. The sender had typed the wrong number, but they'd gotten the right woman. Zara Ardell, attorney at law, daughter of real estate mogul Pierce Eldro, and apparently someone who keeps hotel rooms ready for occasions that don't include her husband. I set the phone down and went back to my drawings. The Hartwell Commercial Center needed finishing, and unlike my marriage, this project still had a chance of turning out the way I'd planned. But the words kept floating back. "Room 410. Can't wait to see you tonight." The rain hammered against the studio windows, turning the streetlights into watercolor smears. I'd chosen this location in the warehouse district because the rent was reasonable and the neighbors minded their own business. Now I wondered if I should have picked somewhere with more witnesses. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was definitely for me. "Working late again? Don't wait up. Zed." Perfect timing. I grabbed my jacket and keys. The Grandview Hotel sat downtown like a glass monument to people with more money than sense. Zara's BMW was already in the parking garage, nestled between a Mercedes and a Lexus in the section reserved for guests who paid extra for discretion. I found a spot 3 rows back and waited. The concrete walls amplified every sound. Footsteps, car doors, the elevator's mechanical hum. At midnight, the place felt like a tomb, all shadows and echoes. 40 minutes later, she appeared. Zara walked differently when she thought no one was watching, less calculated, more relaxed. Her hair was slightly messed, her lipstick refreshed. She looked satisfied in a way I hadn't seen in months. She wasn't alone. Lyle Merrick emerged from the elevator 30 seconds behind her, straightening his tie and checking his watch. Lizard, as I'd always called him, though never to his face. Zara's law partner, family friend, and apparently much more than either. They didn't kiss goodbye. Too risky, even in a parking garage. But the way he touched her lower back as she got into her car said everything that needed saying. I waited until both cars disappeared before starting my engine. The drive home took 15 minutes. Zara was already in bed, pretending to sleep, when I slipped into our bedroom at 1:15. "How was work?" she mumbled into her pillow. "Productive," I said. "Very productive." The next morning I called Keaton Marin, not related to Lyle, despite the similar name, something that had always amused me, and now seemed almost prophetic. Keaton had handled my business legal work for years, back when I was building my firm from nothing while Zara climbed the ladder at Eldro, Pierce, and Associates. "I need to review some old paperwork," I told him over coffee at Murphy's Diner. "Personal stuff." Keaton stirred sugar into his cup and studied my face. He was good at reading people, which made him an excellent lawyer and an occasionally uncomfortable friend. "What kind of personal stuff?" "The kind that involves prenuptial agreements and their enforcement clauses." He nodded slowly. "I see. And this sudden interest in matrimonial law stems from what, exactly?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken the night before. Zara and Lyle in the hotel lobby, his hand on her waist, Lyle touching her car door, the timestamp showing 12:47 a.m. "Well," Keaton said, setting down his coffee, "that's unfortunate." "For who?" "That depends entirely on what's in that prenup. Do you have a copy?" "In my office safe, filed under insurance policies." Keaton almost smiled. "Appropriate. Let's go take a look." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The document was exactly where I'd left it, sealed in a manila envelope marked ZMA, Prenuptial Agreement, Original. 18 pages of legal language that Zara had signed without reading, trusting her father's assurance that it was standard protection for both parties. Pierce Eldro had insisted on the prenup, not because he distrusted me, he'd explained, but because family wealth required family protection. Zara had been embarrassed by the whole thing, apologizing as she signed each page. "It's just a formality," she'd said. "We'll never need it." Keaton spread the pages across my desk and started reading. His expression grew more interested with each clause. "This is thorough," he said finally. "Whoever drafted this knew what they were doing." Pierce's attorney, some specialist from Chicago. They earned their fee. Look at Section 7, subsection C. I leaned over his shoulder. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. In the event of divorce proceedings initiated by the wife, certain triggers would activate. Infidelity clauses, asset protection protocols, forfeiture provisions. What does it mean in plain English? Keaton tapped the page. It means if Zara files for divorce and if certain conditions are met, she gets nothing. Not half, not a settlement, nothing. What conditions? Adultery, for one, but it has to be proven according to specific standards outlined here. He flipped to another page. Photos, documentation, witness testimony. The bar is high, but not impossible to meet. I thought about the hotel room, the text message, the way Lyle had touched her back. How high? Let me study this more carefully. But Trent, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you need to be very careful. Evidence gathering has rules. Cross those lines and everything becomes inadmissible. I'm not planning to break any rules. Good. Because if this prenup holds up, and if you can meet the evidentiary requirements, Zara's going to get the surprise of her life. That evening, Zara came home with takeout from Romano's and a bottle of wine. She was trying too hard to seem normal, which made her seem anything but. "How was your day?" she asked, setting containers on the kitchen counter. "Interesting. Yours?" "The usual. Depositions, document review, client meetings." She opened the wine with practiced efficiency. "Lyle and I are working on the Henderson case. It might require some late nights." "I'm sure it will." She handed me a glass and raised hers. "To successful partnerships." I clinked my glass against hers. "To getting what you deserve." We ate dinner making small talk about work and weather and weekend plans. Zara seemed relaxed, almost happy. She had no idea that her carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. After she went to bed, I sat in my home office and made a list. Evidence needed. Witnesses to contact. Timeline to establish. Keaton was right about the rules, but rules worked both ways. If Zara wanted to play games, I'd make sure we were playing by the same rulebook. The prenup sat open on my desk, 18 pages of legal protection that Zara had forgotten she'd signed. She'd been so focused on pleasing her father, so eager to move past the awkwardness of discussing money and divorce before marriage, that she'd never bothered to understand what she was agreeing to. That oversight was about to become very expensive. My phone buzzed with another text. This time it was definitely meant for me, though the sender might not have realized it. "Thanks for tonight. Can't wait for tomorrow. L." I screenshotted the message and added it to a new folder on my phone. Evidence. Then I poured myself another glass of wine and started planning my next move. The Eldro, Pierce & Associates building dominated 3 blocks of downtown like a glass and steel monument to legal ambition. I'd been there dozens of times for firm parties and family gatherings, but walking through the lobby that Thursday afternoon felt different. I wasn't there as Zara's husband. I was there as an investigator. The security guard recognized me and waved me toward the elevators. "Mrs. Ardell expecting you?" "Surprise visit," I said, which was technically true. Zara's office occupied a corner of the 15th floor, with windows overlooking the river and enough square footage to house a small family. Her assistant, Monica, looked up from her computer as I approached. "Trent, what a nice surprise. Zara's in a meeting, but she should be free in about 20 minutes. No problem. I'll wait. Monica gestured toward the leather chairs arranged around a glass coffee table. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, thanks. The waiting area provided a perfect view of the conference room where Zara was conducting her meeting. Through the glass walls, I could see her presenting documents to 3 men in expensive suits. She looked confident, professional, completely in control. Lyle Merrick sat at the far end of the conference table, taking notes and occasionally leaning forward to whisper something in Zara's ear. Each time he did, she smiled and nodded, their heads close together in a way that suggested familiarity beyond professional collaboration. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check messages while actually recording video through the camera app. Nothing incriminating, just documentation of their comfortable intimacy. Every piece of evidence mattered. The meeting ended at 3:40. The clients shook hands with Zara and filed out, chatting among themselves about contract terms and closing dates. Lyle lingered, gathering papers and saying something that made Zara laugh. When she finally noticed me through the glass, her expression shifted slightly. Not guilty, exactly, but surprised. She said something to Lyle, who glanced in my direction and nodded before heading toward his own office. Honey, Zara said, emerging from the conference room with her professional smile firmly in place. What brings you downtown? Finished the Hartwell project early. Thought I'd take my beautiful wife to lunch. That's sweet, but it's almost 4 o'clock. Early dinner, then. She checked her watch, a gesture I'd seen thousands of times but now recognized as a stalling tactic. I really should finish up here. Rain check? Of course. Work comes first. You know it's not like that. Do I? The question hung between us for a moment before Zara's professional mask slipped back into place. Let me walk you to the elevator. We rode down 15 floors in silence. In the lobby, she kissed my cheek and promised to be home by 7. I watched her return to the elevator bank, then walked to my car and drove 3 blocks to Murphy's Diner. Keaton was already waiting in our usual booth, a stack of papers spread across the table like tarot cards predicting an ugly future. I've been through the prenup 6 times, he said without preamble. It's airtight. Whoever drafted this document anticipated every possible challenge. That's good news, right? For you, yes. For Zara, not so much. He slid a yellow legal pad across the table. I've outlined the key provisions and what you'll need to prove them. The list was longer than I'd expected. Documented evidence of adultery, financial records showing commingling of assets, witness testimony regarding behavior patterns, communication records establishing ongoing deception. Some of this I already have, I said, thinking about the text messages and photos. The rest shouldn't be too difficult to obtain. Be careful about that. Evidence obtained through illegal means is worthless in court. Worse than worthless. It can get you into serious trouble. I understand. Keaton leaned back and studied my face. Do you? Because you have a look I've seen before, usually right before someone does something spectacularly stupid. What kind of look? The kind that says you're thinking about more than just legal proceedings. Trent, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't do anything that could jeopardize this case. No confrontations, no dramatic gestures, no vigilante justice. Let the system work. I promised, though we both knew promises made in anger rarely survived contact with reality. That evening, Zara came home at 8:30 with apologies and explanations. The Henderson case was more complicated than expected. Lyle had uncovered some issues with the property survey. They'd had to order dinner to the office and work through the evening. You could have called, I said. You're right. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. But it did happen again. Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Sunday evening. Each time, the excuse was slightly different, but the pattern remained the same. Important case, unexpected complications, Lyle's invaluable assistance. By Monday morning, I had a comprehensive timeline of Zara's lies and a growing collection of evidence. Text messages sent to the wrong number, Photos of cars in hotel parking garages, credit card receipts from restaurants where Zara claimed to be working, but was actually dining with someone who wasn't me. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It was pretending everything was normal while my marriage disintegrated in real time. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the Grandview Hotel and had a conversation with the parking attendant, a college kid named Danny, who recognized me from my previous surveillance visits. "You're that architect guy, right? The one with the BMW wife?" "That's me. She's here a lot, usually with the same dude. Fancy dresser, tips well, drives the black Audi." "How often is a lot?" Danny shrugged. "Couple times a week, maybe more. They've got a regular thing going." I handed him a $20 bill. "If you see them again, would you mind taking a photo? For my lawyer." "Man, that's rough. But yeah, I can do that." Wednesday evening, Zara announced she'd be working late again. I waited until her car left our driveway, then drove to Lyle's house in the suburbs. His wife Jennifer was loading groceries from her minivan, wrestling with paper bags while their 2 kids ran circles around the garage. She looked tired in the way that comes from managing a household while your husband works late every night. I parked across the street and watched her struggle with the groceries, thinking about the conversation I could have with her, the evidence I could share, the way her world would implode when she learned what her husband was really doing during those late nights at the office. But Keaton's warning echoed in my head. Let the system work. Don't do anything stupid. I drove home and waited for my wife to return from her latest lie. She came home at midnight with messed hair and a story about document review that ran longer than expected. I listened to every word, nodded at appropriate moments, and filed each detail away for future reference. "You seem different lately," she said as we got ready for bed. "Different how?" "Distant, distracted. Is everything okay?" I looked at her in the bathroom mirror, this woman I'd loved and married and trusted with my future. She was still beautiful, still charming, still capable of making me believe her lies if I let myself. "Everything's fine," I said. "Just thinking about work." "The Hartwell project?" "Among other things." She kissed my cheek and went to bed. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, adding new evidence to my growing file and planning the next phase of my investigation. The prenup sat on my desk like a loaded weapon, 18 pages of legal protection that Zara had forgotten existed. Soon, she'd remember. Soon, she'd understand exactly what she'd signed away in her eagerness to please her father and move forward with our wedding. But first, I needed to make sure I had everything documented. Every lie, every deception, every moment of betrayal that would justify what was coming next. The system would work, just like Keaton promised. But it would work for me, not for her. The charity gala at the Riverside Convention Center was Pierce Eldrow's kind of event. Expensive tickets, influential guests, and enough social visibility to make everyone behave like civilized human beings. Zara had insisted we attend together, presenting a united front for her father's business associates and her own professional network. I adjusted my bow tie and watched her work the room. She was magnificent at these things, moving from group to group with practiced grace, remembering names and details that mattered to people who mattered to her career. If I hadn't known about her double life, I might have been proud. "Trent Ardell, right?" A voice behind me belonged to Marcus Hoffman, one of Pierce's business partners. "How's the architecture business?" "Busy enough. How's real estate development?" "Can't complain. Your wife's been handling some contract work for us. Sharp woman. You're lucky to have her." I'm beginning to understand exactly how lucky. Marcus missed the sarcasm and launched into a story about property values and zoning regulations. I nodded and smiled while scanning the room for Lyle Merrick, who was supposed to be here as Zara's colleague and nothing more. I found him near the bar, talking to Jennifer. His wife looked elegant in a navy dress, smiling and laughing at whatever story he was telling. They looked like a happy couple, which made what I knew about his extracurricular activities even more disgusting. Zara appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Having fun? Absolutely. Nothing I enjoy more than watching people pretend to care about charity while networking for business advantages. You're in a mood tonight. Am I? I hadn't noticed. She studied my face with the analytical expression she used in depositions. Is something bothering you? Should something be bothering me? Before she could answer, Pierce Eldrow's voice boomed across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for a moment. The crowd turned toward the small stage where Pierce stood with a microphone, looking every inch the successful businessman in his custom tuxedo. He thanked everyone for their generous support, mentioned the evening's cause with appropriate gravity, and began introducing the key sponsors. I'd also like to recognize some of the talented professionals who make our community stronger, he continued. My daughter Zara and her partner Lyle Merrick have been instrumental in several major development projects this year. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Zara smiled and waved. Lyle raised his glass in acknowledgement. I wondered if anyone else noticed how comfortable they looked sharing the spotlight. In fact, Pierce continued, Zara and Lyle have been working so closely together that I sometimes think they share a brain. More laughter, more applause. Jennifer Merrick beamed with pride at her husband's recognition. I wanted to throw up. The speeches continued for another 20 minutes. When they finally ended, the crowd dispersed back to their conversations and networking. I excused myself and headed for the men's room, needing a moment away from the performance. Lyle was washing his hands when I walked in. The restroom was quiet except for the steady rush of water and the muted noise of the reception filtering through the walls, laughter, the clink of glasses, applause fading in and out. He glanced at me in the mirror, polite recognition flickering across his face before he looked back down at the sink. We'd nodded to each other before, exchanged the kind of comments people make when they recognize a name on a place card or a firm on a letterhead, but nothing that lingered. Tonight, standing shoulder to shoulder under unforgiving fluorescent lights, the distance between stranger and acquaintance felt thin, almost flimsy. We'd exchanged pleasantries at previous events, but never had a real conversation. Tonight felt like the right time to change that. Nice speech from Pierce, I said, taking the sink next to his. He's good at those, knows how to work a crowd. Must be nice, getting recognized for your hard work. It's been a good year. Zara and I make a strong team. I'm sure you do. All those late nights at the office must be paying off. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, exactly, but awareness. His shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes lingered on my reflection a beat longer than necessary before he shut off the tap. The Henderson case has been particularly demanding. I imagine it has. Zara's been putting in a lot of hours, coming home after midnight some nights. Complex transactions require attention to detail. Of course, though I have to admit I'm sometimes surprised by how much attention some details require. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to feel deliberate. Lyle dried his hands and straightened his jacket, smoothing the lapels as if precision could restore balance. Well, that's what clients pay for. Thorough representation. Absolutely. Speaking of thorough, I've been meaning to ask, do you always use the Grandview Hotel for client meetings, or is that a recent development? The question hit its target. Lyle's face went pale, then flushed red. The color climbed quickly from his collar to his temples, and his jaw tightened as if he were biting back something sharp. I'm not sure what you mean. Just curious about your business practices, professional interest. I think there's been some misunderstanding. Has there? That's unfortunate. Misunderstandings can be so problematic, especially in professional relationships. Lyle moved toward the door, his movements suddenly efficient, almost abrupt. I should get back to Jennifer. Give her my regards. She seems like a lovely woman. Very trusting. He left without another word. I waited a few minutes before returning to the main event, giving him time to compose himself and wonder exactly how much I knew. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and careful observations. I watched Zara and Lyle interact, noting how they avoided each other after his return from the men's room. I watched Jennifer chat with other wives, oblivious to her husband's distraction. I watched Pierce hold court with his business associates, proud of his daughter's success and unaware of how she was achieving it. At 11:30, we said our goodbyes and headed for the parking garage. Zara was quiet during the drive home, staring out the passenger window at the city lights. "You were different tonight," she said finally. "Different how?" "I don't know. More aggressive. That conversation with Lyle seemed tense." "Did it? I thought we were just talking shop." "It didn't look like shop talk." "What did it look like?" She turned to face me. "It looked like you were trying to make a point." "What kind of point?" "I don't know, Trent. That's what I'm asking you." We pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. The automatic garage door opener was in Zara's purse, but neither of us reached for it. "Are we okay?" she asked. "Are we?" "You keep answering my questions with questions." "Do I?" "There, you just did it again." I turned off the engine and looked at her. In the dim light from the dashboard, she looked younger, more vulnerable. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "We're fine," I said. "Just tired." She found the garage door opener and we went inside. The house felt different now, like a stage set for a play that was ending. We went through our nighttime routine, brushing teeth, changing clothes, setting alarms, with the mechanical precision of people who'd been married long enough to navigate around each other without really connecting. In bed, Zara curled up on her side of the mattress and was asleep within minutes. I lay awake listening to her breathe, thinking about the conversation with Lyle and the look on his face when I mentioned the Grandview Hotel. He knew that I knew. The question was what he'd do about it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Danny from the hotel parking garage had come through with another photo, Lyle and Zara entering the Grandview together at 9:15 p.m., while I was home thinking she was working late on the Henderson case. I added the photo to my evidence file and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, I'd call Keaton and update him on the evening's developments. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the next phase of my strategy. But tonight, I lay in bed next to my unfaithful wife and wondered how much longer I could maintain the pretense that our marriage was worth saving. The answer, I realized, was not much longer at all. Keaton's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house, 6 blocks from the courthouse. The building had character, which was legal profession code for needs updating, but has historical charm. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had been guarding the front desk since the Carter administration and treated clients like potential threats to her employer's well-being. "He's expecting you," she said, barely looking up from her typing. "Conference room." I found Keaton spreading documents across a mahogany table that had probably witnessed 1,000 legal strategies, most of them involving someone's attempt to avoid consequences for their poor decisions. "How was the gala?" he asked. "Educational. I had an interesting conversation with Lyle Merrick." "Please tell me you didn't threaten him." I asked about his business practices, specifically his use of hotel conference rooms for client meetings. Keaton winced. "That sounds like a threat." It was a question. He chose to interpret it as a threat, which tells us something about his state of mind. It tells us he's going to be more careful now. It also tells us you're getting impatient. I sat down across from him and pulled out my phone. Danny from the hotel parking garage sent me this last night. The photo showed Zara and Lyle entering the Grandview Hotel at 9:15 p.m., on the same evening she'd told me she was working late on document review. The timestamp was clear, their body language was intimate, and their destination was obvious. "This is good," Keaton said, studying the image. But we need more. Pattern of behavior, financial records, communication evidence. The prenup requires comprehensive documentation. How comprehensive? Think of it as building a legal case because that's exactly what we're doing. Even though this is a civil matter, the evidentiary standards are similar to criminal proceedings. He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. We need to establish timeline, opportunity, and intent. The hotel photos establish opportunity. The text messages suggest intent. But we need more timeline documentation. I've been keeping a log of her lies. Times she said she was working late, places she claimed to be, stories that don't match the evidence. Good. We'll need that organized chronologically with supporting documentation for each discrepancy. Keaton leaned back in his chair and gave me the look I'd learned to recognize over our years of friendship. It was his difficult client expression, the one that meant he was about to say something I didn't want to hear. Trent, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay? What's your end game here? Are you trying to save your marriage, or are you trying to destroy it? I'm trying to protect myself. From what? From being taken advantage of by someone who thinks I'm too stupid to notice what she's doing. That's not an answer. That's anger talking. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Below, people went about their normal lives, shopping, working, meeting friends for lunch. None of them were sitting in a lawyer's office planning the systematic destruction of their marriage. She filed papers yesterday, I said, without turning around. The silence behind me stretched long enough that I finally looked back. Keaton was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. She what? Zara filed for divorce. Her attorney submitted the paperwork to the courthouse yesterday afternoon. And you didn't think to mention this when you walked in? I wanted to see how long it would take you to figure out why I was really here. Keaton grabbed his phone and started dialing. Mrs. Patterson, get me the courthouse filing records for yesterday. Family Court Division. Ardell versus Ardell. He hung up and looked at me. When did she tell you? She didn't. I have a contact in the clerk's office who gives me a heads up when my name appears on legal documents. Professional courtesy. Have you confronted her about it? Not yet. I'm waiting to see how she handles it. What do you mean? I mean, I'm curious whether she'll tell me herself or just have me served with papers. Keaton's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, and scribbled notes on his legal pad. She's asking for half of everything, he said after hanging up. Assets, business equity, retirement accounts, the works, standard no-fault divorce filing with equitable distribution claims. What's our response? Our response is to let her attorney know that we'll be asserting the prenuptial agreement as a complete defense to her claims. How long does that take? The legal process? Months, assuming she contests the prenup's validity. But the psychological process starts immediately. What do you mean? Keaton smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. I mean, Zara's about to learn that the document she signed to please her father is going to cost her everything she thinks she's entitled to. That evening, I waited for Zara to come home and tell me about the divorce filing. She arrived at 7:30 with Chinese takeout and her usual collection of work stories, none of which mentioned spending the afternoon at her attorney's office. We ate dinner, discussing the weather and weekend plans. She seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. I realized she was probably looking forward to being rid of me and moving on with her new life. I've been thinking about redecorating the living room, she said over sweet and sour chicken. Have you? Maybe something more modern, less traditional. Planning ahead? Just thinking about change. Sometimes change is good. Sometimes it's expensive. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. What do you mean? I mean, redecorating costs money. We should probably discuss major expenses. Of course. We always discuss major expenses. Do we? I can't remember the last time we talked about money. We talk about money all the time. We talk about spending money. We don't talk about protecting money. I'm not sure I understand the distinction. I set down my chopsticks and looked at her directly. The distinction is between planning for the future together and planning for separate futures. The silence stretched between us like a fault line, marking the boundary between what we'd been pretending and what we both knew was coming. Trent, is there something you want to tell me? Is there something you want to tell me? You're doing it again, answering questions with questions. Am I? She threw her napkin on the table. This is ridiculous. If you have something to say, just say it. Okay, I know about the divorce papers. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, embarrassment, defiance, and finally resignation. How long have you known? Since yesterday afternoon, about 6 hours after you filed them. I was going to tell you. When? Tonight, actually. I just wanted to have dinner first. One last normal evening. How thoughtful. Don't be sarcastic. This is difficult enough. Difficult for who? For both of us. I laughed, which seemed to surprise her. Zara, this isn't difficult for me. This is clarifying. What do you mean? I mean, now I know where we stand. No more pretending, no more wondering, no more trying to figure out what's wrong with our marriage. So you're okay with this? I'm fine with it. The question is whether you'll be okay with it. Why wouldn't I be? Because I don't think you've thought this through as carefully as you believe you have. Trent, I'm a lawyer. I understand the legal implications of divorce. Do you, all of them? What are you talking about? I stood up and started clearing the dinner dishes. I'm talking about the document you signed before our wedding, the one your father insisted on, the one you were so embarrassed about that you never bothered to read it carefully. I watched understanding dawn on her face like sunrise over a disaster area. The prenup, she said quietly. The prenup. But that was just standard protection language. Boilerplate stuff. Was it? Are you sure about that? Of course I'm sure. My father's attorney explained everything. To your father, maybe. But did he explain it to you? The color was draining from her face. What are you saying? I'm saying you might want to review that document before you get too excited about your equitable distribution claims. You're bluffing. Am I? The prenup protects both of us equally. Standard reciprocal provisions. If you say so, I do say so, then you have nothing to worry about. But she was worried now. I could see it in her eyes, the first crack in her confidence. She was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd made a mistake. I should call my attorney, she said. You should definitely call your attorney. She left the kitchen, and I heard her dialing upstairs. The sound of her footsteps faded along the hallway, the old wood creaking in familiar protest, and then the muffled click of a door closing. I stayed where I was, staring at the half-cleared table, listening as her voice rose and fell through the ceiling, at first controlled, then sharper, words tumbling faster as whatever she was hearing failed to reassure her. The minutes stretched, marked by the slow cooling of food and the dull hum of the refrigerator. Every so often there was a pause, just long enough to suggest someone else speaking on the other end, and then her tone would spike again, edged with panic she hadn't bothered to mask. By the time 20 minutes had passed, the tension in the house felt physical, like pressure in the air before a storm. When she came back down, her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. My attorney wants to review the prenup, she said. That sounds wise. Do you have a copy? I do. Can I see it? Your attorney can request it through proper channels. Trent, please. We're still married. We can discuss this like adults. Can we? Because filing for divorce without telling your husband doesn't seem very adult to me. I was going to tell you tonight. After you'd already set the legal process in motion. I thought it would be easier this way. Easier for who? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The silence that followed was thick, her eyes dropping to the floor as if it might offer a way out of the conversation. I watched the small, involuntary movements, her fingers curling and uncurling, the quick swallow as she tried to steady herself. Details that told me more than anything she could have said. "I'm going to stay at my father's tonight," she said finally. "That's probably a good idea. We'll talk tomorrow after I've had a chance to review everything. I'll be here." She packed a bag and left without saying goodbye. I listened to the front door close, the finality of the sound echoing through the house, then moved on autopilot through the remains of dinner, stacking plates, rinsing glasses, wiping down the counter as if routine could scrub away the tension. The wine tasted sharp and grounding as I poured it, a small anchor before I dialed Keaton's number. "She knows," I said when he answered. "How'd she take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. She's at her father's, probably having an emergency family meeting." "Good. Let them panic for a while. It'll make the eventual negotiation more productive." "What negotiation? The prenup is clear." "The prenup is clear to us, but they'll challenge it, claim it was signed under duress, or that she didn't understand the terms, or that circumstances have changed since the wedding." "Will that work?" "Not if we've documented everything properly. Which reminds me, I need you to compile all your evidence into a comprehensive timeline. Photos, text messages, witness statements, everything organized chronologically." "How long do I have?" "Probably not long. Once Pierce Eldro gets involved, things will move quickly." I hung up and went to my home office, where the prenup still sat on my desk like a legal time bomb waiting to explode. 18 pages of carefully crafted language that Zara had signed without understanding. The paper looked deceptively ordinary under the desk lamp, edges perfectly aligned, the weight of it far heavier than its thickness suggested. Tomorrow, she'd understand. Tomorrow, she'd realize that her eagerness to please her father had cost her everything she thought she was entitled to. The thought settled with a grim sense of inevitability as I pulled a chair closer and opened my laptop, already mentally sorting through dates and details. But tonight, I had work to do. Pierce Eldro's office occupied the entire top floor of his downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city he'd helped shape through 40 years of real estate development. I'd been there many times for family gatherings, but never as an adversary. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 50s, greeted me with professional courtesy, tinged with obvious discomfort. "Mr. Ardell, they're waiting for you in the conference room." They turned out to be an impressive collection of legal firepower. Pierce sat at the head of the table in his custom suit, flanked by 2 attorneys I didn't recognize. Zara occupied the chair to his right, looking pale and tired. Her attorney, Rebecca Martinez, sat across from her with an open file folder and a grim expression. Keaton and I took the remaining seats. The conference table was large enough to host a corporate merger, which seemed appropriate given the amount of money at stake. "Gentlemen," Pierce began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations, "I think we can resolve this situation quickly and amicably." "I hope so," Keaton replied, "though that depends on what you consider a reasonable resolution." Rebecca Martinez opened her file folder. "We've reviewed the prenuptial agreement in question. Our position is that the document contains several problematic provisions that may not be enforceable under current state law." "Which provisions specifically?" Keaton asked. "The forfeiture clauses in Section 7 appear to be punitive rather than protective. The adultery provisions set an unreasonably high evidentiary standard, and the asset protection language is so broad as to be potentially unconscionable." Keaton nodded thoughtfully. "Those are interesting arguments. Do you have case law to support them?" "We're prepared to cite several relevant precedents." "I'd like to see those citations. In the meantime, let me share our position." Keaton pulled out his own file folder, considerably thicker than Rebecca's. The prenuptial agreement was drafted by one of Chicago's most respected matrimonial attorneys, It was reviewed by independent counsel. Both parties signed voluntarily after full disclosure of assets and obligations. The language is clear, the provisions are reasonable, and the enforcement mechanisms are well within established legal parameters. Pierce leaned forward. Keaton, let's be practical here. This document was signed 8 years ago under very different circumstances. What circumstances have changed? Zara's career has advanced significantly. She's contributed substantially to the marriage's financial success. The original agreement doesn't reflect the current reality of their partnership. The agreement specifically addresses career advancement and contribution scenarios. Section 4, subsections A through D. I watched Zara's face as Keaton spoke. She was beginning to understand that the document she'd signed wasn't the simple formality she'd believed it to be. Rebecca tried a different approach. Even if the prenup is technically valid, the adultery provisions require proof that may be impossible to obtain. What kind of proof? Pierce asked. Keaton smiled. I'm glad you asked. He opened his folder and began laying photographs on the conference table. Zara and Lyle entering the Grandview Hotel. Zara and Lyle in the hotel parking garage. Zara and Lyle at restaurants, where she'd claimed to be working alone. These establish opportunity and pattern of behavior, Keaton continued, adding printed copies of text messages to the display. These establish communication and intent. Zara stared at the evidence spread across the table. You had me followed. I had you documented, I said. There's a difference. This is harassment. This is evidence gathering, all obtained through legal means in public spaces. Pierce studied the photographs with the analytical expression he used when evaluating property investments. This is circumstantial. It's comprehensive, Keaton corrected. And it's just the beginning. He added hotel receipts, credit card statements, and a typed timeline of Zara's lies about working late. The documentation painted a clear picture of systematic deception spanning several months. How did you get financial records? Rebecca asked. Joint credit cards, shared accounts, and publicly available information. Nothing obtained through illegal means. Pierce sat back in his chair. What do you want, Trent? I want what the prenup provides: clean separation, asset protection, and enforcement of the forfeiture provisions. That leaves Zara with nothing. That leaves Zara with the consequences of her choices. She's still my daughter. She's still my wife, until the divorce is finalized. Zara spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. I never meant for this to happen. Which part? The affair or getting caught? Any of it. The whole situation just developed over time. How long? What? How long has it been developing? She looked at her father, then at Rebecca, then back at me. 6 months, maybe 7. Try again. What do you mean? Keaton slid another document across the table. Hotel records going back 14 months. Your relationship with Lyle Merrick has been considerably more developed than you're admitting. The color drained from Zara's face. Pierce picked up the hotel records and scanned them quickly, his expression growing darker with each page. 14 months, he said quietly. Give or take, I replied. While you were working on family business. While she was working on something. Pierce set down the documents and looked at his daughter. Zara, is this accurate? Daddy, it's complicated. It's not complicated. It's documented. Rebecca tried to regain control of the conversation. Regardless of the timeline, we maintain that the forfeiture provisions are unenforceable. Then let's test that theory in court, Keaton said. Full discovery, witness testimony, public proceedings. I'm sure the local legal community would find it fascinating. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just getting started. Zara's law career depended on her professional reputation. Public exposure of her affair would damage more than her marriage. Pierce understood the implications immediately. What would it take to resolve this privately? acceptance of the prenup's terms, and an uncontested divorce proceeding. That's everything. That's the agreement Zara signed. She was 28 years old. She was a licensed attorney who understood legal documents. She trusted the family. She should have read what she was signing. The meeting continued for another hour, with Rebecca and Pierce's attorneys exploring various challenges to the prenup's enforceability. Keaton systematically demolished each argument with case law, precedent, and the overwhelming strength of our evidence. Finally, Pierce called for a recess. "We need time to discuss this privately." "Of course," Keaton said. "Take all the time you need. But understand that every day this drags on increases the likelihood of public exposure." Zara, Pierce, and their legal team filed out of the conference room. Keaton and I remained seated, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's betrayal. "How do you think it went?" I asked. "Better than expected. They're realizing the prenup is solid and the evidence is overwhelming." "What happens next?" "They'll try to negotiate some kind of settlement. Maybe offer you money to walk away quietly." "I don't want their money. I know. But they don't understand that yet." 20 minutes later they returned. Pierce looked older, Zara looked defeated, and Rebecca looked like someone who'd just lost an argument she'd expected to win. "We have a proposal," Pierce said. "I'm listening." "Zara will accept the prenup's asset protection provisions in exchange for a confidentiality agreement regarding the circumstances of the divorce." "What kind of confidentiality?" "No public disclosure of the adultery allegations or supporting evidence." I looked at Keaton, who shrugged slightly. The decision was mine. "Counter-proposal," I said. "Zara accepts all the prenup's provisions, including forfeiture clauses, and agrees to an uncontested divorce proceeding. In exchange, I won't provide copies of the evidence to Lyle Merrick's wife." The silence that followed was profound. "You wouldn't," Zara said. "Wouldn't I?" "Jennifer doesn't deserve this. Neither did I. That's different." "How?" "We were already having problems." "Were we?" "I hadn't noticed." Pierce intervened. "Trent, let's be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm offering to keep this private in exchange for acceptance of the legal agreement your daughter voluntarily signed." "What about Lyle?" "What about him?" "His family will be destroyed." "His family is already destroyed. They just don't know it yet." Rebecca tried one last argument. "This is extortion." "This is consequence," Keaton corrected. "Natural and predictable consequence of documented behavior." The meeting ended with Pierce requesting another recess to discuss terms with his daughter. I didn't need to hear their conversation to know how it would go. Zara would realize she had no choice but to accept the prenup's terms, and Pierce would realize that his attempt to protect his daughter had backfired spectacularly. 2 hours later, Rebecca called Keaton with their decision. Zara Ardell would accept the prenuptial agreement's provisions in full. The divorce would proceed uncontested. The evidence would remain confidential. She would get nothing, just as the document she'd signed to please her parents had always specified. The marriage was over, but the real consequences were just beginning. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Judge Patricia Henley's courtroom. I arrived early, partly from habit, and partly because I wanted to observe the courthouse's morning routine. Lawyers hurried past with their briefcases and billable hour anxiety. Clerks processed paperwork with bureaucratic efficiency. Families waited nervously for their cases to be called. None of them knew they were about to witness the systematic destruction of someone's expectations. Keaton met me in the hallway outside courtroom 3B. "Ready for this?" "I've been ready for months." "Zara's team is here. Pierce looks like he hasn't slept." "Good. You're enjoying this more than you should." "Am I enjoying it the right amount?" "There's no right amount for enjoying someone else's misery." "Even when they earned it?" "Especially then." Judge Henley's courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Zara sat at the plaintiff's table with Rebecca Martinez, wearing a conservative navy suit and the expression of someone attending her own funeral. Pierce occupied the first row of public seating, flanked by his attorneys. He nodded when I entered, a gesture that might have been respect or resignation. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Henley presiding." Judge Henley was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades listening to people's worst decisions. She reviewed the file folder in front of her, then looked up at the assembled attorneys. "This is the matter of Ardell versus Ardell, case number 2023 DR 1847. I understand we have an uncontested divorce proceeding with a prenuptial agreement." "That's correct, Your Honor," Rebecca said, standing. "Rebecca Martinez representing the plaintiff, Zara Meller Ardell." "Keaton Marin representing the defendant, Trent Ardell," Keaton announced. "Ms. Martinez, please proceed." Rebecca approached the bench with a stack of documents. "Your Honor, the plaintiff filed for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. The parties were married on June 15, 2015, and separated on March 20, 2023. There are no minor children and no disputed assets." "No disputed assets?" Judge Henley asked. "That's unusual in a case involving parties with substantial means. The parties executed a comprehensive prenuptial agreement prior to marriage. Both parties agree to its enforcement." Judge Henley opened the prenup and began reading. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she worked through the document's provisions. "This is very thorough," she said finally. "Ms. Martinez, does your client understand the implications of this agreement?" "She does, Your Honor." "Mr. Marin, does your client have any objections to the proposed settlement?" "None, Your Honor. The prenuptial agreement speaks for itself." Judge Henley looked directly at Zara. "Mrs. Ardell, please stand." Zara rose from her chair, her face pale but composed. "Mrs. Ardell, do you understand that by agreeing to enforce this prenuptial agreement, you are waiving any claim to marital assets, spousal support, or property division?" "I do, Your Honor." "Do you understand that this waiver is comprehensive and permanent?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you agree to these terms voluntarily without coercion or duress?" Zara glanced at her father, then at me, then back at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well, Mr. Ardell, please stand." I stood and faced the judge. "Mr. Ardell, do you agree to the divorce on the terms outlined in the prenuptial agreement?" "I do, Your Honor." "Do you have any claims for spousal support or property division?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Henley made notes in the file, then looked up at both attorneys. "I'm prepared to grant the divorce decree. However, given the unusual nature of this settlement, I want to ensure both parties understand what they're agreeing to." She turned to Zara. "Mrs. Ardell, this prenuptial agreement contains forfeiture provisions that are triggered by specific behaviors. Do you understand that these provisions have been invoked?" "I do, Your Honor." "And you accept responsibility for the actions that triggered these provisions?" The courtroom was completely quiet. Even the court reporter seemed to be holding her breath. "Yes, Your Honor," Zara said quietly. "Mr. Ardell, are you satisfied that the prenuptial agreement adequately protects your interests?" "Completely satisfied, Your Honor." Judge Henley signed the divorce decree with a flourish that seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. "The marriage between Trent Ardell and Zara Meller Ardell is hereby dissolved. The prenuptial agreement dated May 10, 2015, is incorporated into this decree and shall govern all aspects of property division and spousal support. This court retains jurisdiction for enforcement purposes only." She looked up at both parties. "You are now legally divorced. Good luck to both of you." The bailiff called the next case, and we filed out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Pierce approached me while Zara spoke quietly with Rebecca. "Trent, I want you to know I don't blame you for this." "Don't you?" Zara made her choices. "You protected yourself. I probably would have done the same thing." "Probably. Definitely. but I'm sorry it came to this. Are you sorry it happened, or sorry she got caught? Pierce considered the question. Both, I suppose. Zara finished her conversation with Rebecca and walked over to us. Up close, she looked exhausted, as if the stress of the past few months had finally caught up with her. Trent, can we talk privately for a moment? I looked at Keaton, who nodded. I'll wait by the elevator. Zara and I walked to a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. Through the tall windows, I could see the city where we'd built our life together and where she'd systematically destroyed it. I want you to know I'm sorry, she said. For which part? All of it. The affair, the lies, the way I handled the divorce filing. Are you sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught? Both. But mostly, sorry I hurt you. Did you think about that while it was happening? Not enough. I was selfish and stupid, and I convinced myself that what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you. But I did know. How long? Long enough. She nodded and looked down at her hands. What happens now? Now you figure out how to rebuild your life. What about Lyle? What about him? Are you going to tell Jennifer? I'd been expecting this question for weeks. That depends. On what? On whether he stays away from me and minds his own business. And if he doesn't? Then Jennifer gets a very interesting photo album. Zara winced. He has children. He should have thought about that before he decided to pursue a married woman. I pursued him too. Yes, you did. And now you both get to live with the consequences. We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the courthouse's ambient noise, conversations, footsteps, the distant sound of another judge calling another case. I know you won't believe this, Zara said finally, but I did love you. Past tense. I still love you, just not the way a wife should love her husband. When did that change? I don't know. Gradually, I think. We grew apart and I was too proud to admit it. So you found someone else instead of working on our marriage? Yes, and that was wrong. Yes, it was. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Forgiveness implied moving forward, letting go, finding peace with what had happened. I wasn't ready for any of that. Maybe someday, I said, but not today. She nodded as if she'd expected that answer. I hope you find happiness, Trent. I really do. I hope you figure out what you actually want before you destroy someone else's life trying to get it. It was a harsh thing to say, but it was honest. Zara had spent our entire marriage trying to have everything: career success, family approval, social status, and romantic excitement, without considering the cost to anyone else. Goodbye, Zara. Goodbye. I walked away without looking back. Keaton was waiting by the elevator with a satisfied expression. How do you feel? He asked as we descended to the lobby. Like I just finished a very long, very expensive project. Any regrets? About the divorce? No. About the marriage? That's more complicated. Most things are. We stepped out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. The city looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. I was no longer married, no longer tied to someone who'd systematically betrayed my trust, no longer wondering what was wrong with my relationship. What's next? Keaton asked. Next, I go back to work and pretend this never happened. That's not very satisfying. It's not supposed to be satisfying. It's supposed to be over. But as I walked to my car, I realized it wasn't really over. Zara would rebuild her life, probably with Lyle if he was willing to leave his own family. Pierce would continue his real estate empire, perhaps a little wiser about the cost of family loyalty. The legal system would move on to the next case, the next divorce, the next family's destruction, and I would go back to my architectural practice, my empty house, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, when someone tries to take advantage of you, the system actually works. The prenup had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had protected me from someone who'd forgotten that actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences are precisely what you signed up for. Zara Ardell had filed for divorce, thinking she would get half. She'd forgotten about the prenup she'd signed to please her parents. When her lawyer read the terms, everything changed. She got nothing, exactly as the document specified. And for the first time in months, that felt like exactly enough.